So, my guest today, Dr. Else van der Berg. I'm not sure if I pronounced it the right way. I hope it was at least close to it. Yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah. So I got aware of you because you're posting a ton of great content on AI native product management. What does it mean to be a product manager in AI native environment? It seems you didn't do that all your life, but you're part of the movement I was waiting for all of my life. Like I'm an old guy, and I was waiting for young people to basically kick my butt when I'm old enough and show us the way on how it should be done today. And I think you're part of that generation who just shows us how it's done and gets rid of all the old rituals we were proud of, all the daily stand-ups and what have you. But you can tell me more about that later on if that's for real or not. I was expecting all of that coming from a totally different direction, not being a movement coming from technology or being enabled by technology. I thought some process thinkers come along and smash everything we thought about in the past to pieces, but now it's technology driven, and that's cool. And I think it's totally refreshing. And after a couple of years of being like, I studied artificial intelligence. I had my master's thesis about this. And so I know all the technologies behind it. I was so conservative about it. And I know all the boundaries and what it can and what it can do and the hallucinations and the prompt injections and what have you. So I was totally, totally defensive all of the time. But I'm totally done with it. I'm over with it. I toyed with it so a lot. And I saw such a huge potential in what it already can do, and I don't want to be distracted about all the AGI discussions and what it can do and the comparisons to the human. I'm just getting bored of it. So I'm looking forward to a conversation on a fresh view on these things, and that's why I was totally interested by everything you're writing in how you would sound like in real life and what you bring to the table in real life. So totally looking forward to this conversation, and maybe we can start with a little bit who you are, what you do, and one of your maybe more extreme statements to the outside world, which we can work forwards throughout the podcast. So, who are you? What makes you you?
Okay, let's go. Firstly, that was a really nice intro. There's so much in there that I would love to unpack. So I'm Else. I have been in tech for about 15 years and in product for about half of that. I became a freelancer 4 years ago now. And I did that because I wanted to get really good at helping teams become more evidence-based. So rather moving from feature factory to running tests, doing product discovery, etc., and outcome driven. So I was working a lot with, or am working a lot with leadership teams on how to set good goals and how to derive product goals from business goals and how to help teams find strategies to move those goals and also connect their work and their ideas to these overarching goals. So that has been my bread and butter for the last 4 years and still is. But now I do that very much supported by AI. And just a quick teaser, like I feel that in the last 6 months to a year, the way I work has changed more than it has over the last 5 years, right? I just feel like how I approach things and how well I can deliver, like there has been so many crazy unlocks, right? So when you talk about, do we compare it to a human? Oh, it's not a human. Oh, it doesn't have real emotions. Yes, okay, fine. Or is it a hype? Is it a bubble? It's like, do you see what it unlocks for you, right? Are you using it? Because for me, it's totally changed everything. So it's impossible for me not to write about it constantly. Yeah. And now when it comes to my most maybe interesting statement, I don't know how interesting it is, but one of the things I keep bumping against is this question of whether product people should even get as deep into using Gen AI as I am. Should we be learning how to code? Should we be teaching ourselves about technical concepts? Should we be vibe coding? Or is it just shiny new object syndrome? And should we just stay specialists, right? I think there's a strong case being made for strict specializations and boundaries. And I have always been a generalist, so I'm very happy that generalists are being embraced again, that we're back on trend. And so I'm a big advocate for generalists, and I think tech is enabling us.
So that's something you've been missing in your former career? Like you felt being put in a box more or less, or had to choose a box to be successful before?
I never did it, right?
Hmm.
Like I just couldn't. I can't do it. And I couldn't, and some people really disliked me for it, and some people really liked me for it, right? For me, it started, so my first product role was 2016, which was then understood more as requirements manager. So I was head of product, but the idea was still that I would just speak to sales and marketing, and they would tell me what needs to be built and by when, and I would turn that into a Jira ticket. And they saw that as my function. And I already there thought, no, but wait a minute. Like, I would like to speak to the customers myself. And what metrics are we trying to move? And are we measuring anything? Is anybody using any of these features that you're suggesting? Can I see the sales pipeline and the win-loss reasons? And in the company, I was in a B2B enterprise company, and everybody was like, get out. Like, don't do that. But some people, like, luckily the CEO really liked it. So I never stuck to my lane. And back then, that was the idea, that was the product lane. Then later came Marty Cagan and a lot of other thinkers who said, actually, no, the product lane is what she was doing. So I think it's always been valuable to have a broader perspective. And now if you're building, especially if you're building an AI-driven product where so much of the user experience is the technology, it makes so much sense to collapse the deeper technical understanding into the product understanding.
That's interesting. My experience was always, like, I don't know. I think I'm a generalist myself more. So the experience I made out of the product role is I was interested in how is my product marketed? How do they do performance marketing? All that. And I saw, for example, in one of the companies, I nearly got kicked out because I was really looking deeply into the data of the product marketing. And I was like, this makes no sense, but a different person built their career on that specific initiative. I'm like, all the data tells me this is not working. Not only does it make no sense, but it is not working. So if it makes sense, it's a matter of opinion, but that it's not working is down there in the data. And I was always put off by not being part of those conversations, because on the other hand, I was always given the responsibility that my product should work, should be sellable, should make the numbers, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but as if there's a front guy in front of me who's doing, senseless stuff. So of course I need to be interested. Anyways, like, all I'm talking about is, like, it seems that with that new way of working, there opens up a world where a person like you finds that space where you are actually needed to think about all these things and beyond your, I don't know, specifics.
Yeah. I think for me, for the first thing where I was crossing boundaries is this moving out of this requirements engineer project manager towards understanding the business and talking to customers. There, luckily, I had some organizations that already saw the value in me doing that, but also Marty Cagan and Teresa Torres helped pave the way for that, right? The product operating model got very popular. And then also I was brought in as a consultant by many companies because they had read those books. So that, I think, was the shift there. But there was still this thick barrier, or for some, right, between product manager and a technical person, maybe even more so, because product managers were now more shoehorned into the research, psychology, business, financial acumen side, and therefore maybe even further away from the tech side. But I think now we're having a new shift, right? And I think that shift is strongly felt by companies that are building something AI-driven or AI-enabled, where the tech and the user experience are pretty much intertwined. I think the shift was a little bit different from moving out of, like, I think when I started products, I was starting at this B2B fintech where traditionally the product manager was more like a requirements engineer who was just talking to business, translating that into a ticket, and just project managing the feature to get launched. And I think the shift from that to the product manager, as described by Marty Cagan, somebody with a strong empathy, who talks to customers and knows how to do that, who can draw insight from there, who runs tests, who can dig into the data, who has a financial acumen, who understands how the business works. That shift happened more. I mean, not in all companies, but started to happen with Marty Cagan's books and Teresa Torres's books, and that like happened in the past 5 years. That's also how I built my career as a consultant. But I think now we have a new shift, because actually that shift pushed product people or product managers more in the business side of things, less so in the technical side of things. But now we have a new shift through Gen AI, firstly, because a lot of companies are building AI products. And if you're a product manager trying to build an AI product and you don't understand the technology behind it, especially if a large part of that technology is calling an LLM or a different model, you need to understand how that works, right? You need to understand how context windows works and how routing works, and you need to understand a lot of stuff. And I think it collapses everything, right? The user expectations are totally impacted by the actual technology underlying it. So there's a need, I think, for you to understand the technology. And then there's also this possibility for you to understand the technology, because you can teach yourself by talking to agents, which may not always be correct. Luckily, you also have an engineer by your side who you can also learn from, ideally. But it unlocks so much, right? In the past, I could never lock our most senior engineer into a room and go like, right, let's sit down. I'm going to just fire questions at you and I want you to explain it to me. But I can do that, right, day and night with Claude if I want.
So what I find interesting is like maybe like the last real technological transformation was when the internet came up, but then there was a little smaller one, which was when mobile came up. And at that time I was working at eBay, and we had a department that just opened, and it was, of course, the mobile department. And what we realized was that technological move also brought a similar movement in which we didn't have that much of a profound differentiation between the product managers and the technology guys, because that shift also required all of us to lean down into the technology and understand what's possible at all, what are the boundaries. So simply being a business guy didn't help. So that had the same change of product guys towards technology. Then it went back away again when mobile was just a commodity again. And now we have that totally drastic shift, which was happening and when the internet came on. Because like when I had my first job, there was no differentiation between product and technology. It was just like you worked in tech and saw what's possible and just did it. And I had to learn, and there was actually a reason why I founded my company. I had to learn what product actually is. And I found so little literature that I said like, I'm going to train people on what product is and just got to do it. So I think that's interesting, that all the technological changes always bring us closer to technology potentially again, because it's just necessary. And it opens up that space. I want to go back to you, and I want to give people an impression on like what it means that you are a generalist. Like if I follow what you're writing on LinkedIn, you write like every other week, you write about a small app or a little helper that you wrote on your own by vibe coding, or however you want to call it, conversational coding, context coding, who gives, like any of these things. Then you even went down on how you vibe coded a rag on your own and all that, which is, that's not for the faint-hearted. Even if you vibe code, like you need to know what a vector database and all that stuff, like you need to have some technical depth on that. So basically you tinker along with a lot of tools and processes and give great summaries about this. So that's how broad you think. And what it brought you, and that's what I want to talk about in depth a little bit, is you gave that great presentation also on LinkedIn, very small, very to the point, with we basically sum up what is the difference between normal companies and AI native companies. And let's start with the first sentence, maybe that's in the beginning of the presentation. What you say is that, and I think you've been that much a fan of that as me, and you said that before, the old paradigm is validate before you build, and something's happening with that, which is interesting, because people like you and me were out there preaching the validate before you build, and there's still, of course, a ton of people out there doing nothing else and just telling people validate before you build, and something seems to shift there. And maybe what is your point on that, and what is your opinion on that, or your observation?
Yeah, that's a very tricky one, right? And I think it's very multifaceted. Because I think validate before you build was right for multiple reasons. And some of those reasons still count, still make sense, and others don't, right? And I've also gone wrong, to be honest, lately on the other side. Right? So before, for me, the credo was try to sell it before you build it, right? Not like validate means sell it. When you have a new feature idea or something like that. And one of the reasons was that building is expensive, right? And of course, that has been turned upside down, right? The unit economics have just completely changed, although to some degree, right? Because if you want to validate through an MVP, there's the V in there, the viable mark. And that one is still pretty hard to attain, also depending on your target audience. But in many cases, you can ship something that does hit the viable mark at a low enough cost to be able to essentially pull that test method, because in the end, launching even a fully fledged product is also a test to me, right? Like everything is a test because you're just trying to collect data to see if your assumptions were true or false. So launching an MVP or launching a feature or launching something to me is a test method, which I used to push out as much as possible because expensive, which is less the case now. On the other side, in some cases, delivering something, shipping a feature, building an MVP just is the wrong test method for the assumption that you are trying to validate. So then it's not about too early or too late. It just cannot validate the thing that you are trying to validate. So one thing that I started doing, I think incorrectly now looking back, I'm working with a relatively small startup called Wave. It's a terminal. It's an AI native terminal. And as you can imagine, we are still figuring out the target audience, the positioning, right? This is like constant evolution, also because the landscape is changing so fast. If you're building anything AI native, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because you're just constantly on your toes and trying to figure out what still needs to be addressed, what makes sense. So we've had a few pivots. So the question that I was trying to address is really, what should it be? This very open, very big question. It's not should the button be on the left or on the right, or should it have this menu item here or not? But it's really like, what value proposition resonates with whom? How I would address that beforehand is I would have picked an ICP and done a lot of interviews to try to understand if there are any hair on fire problems for me to solve. So it would have been way more open-ended discovery, which I have been sometimes works and sometimes it's very frustrating. I don't know if you've done it, right? But sometimes you have endless conversations and just like nothing really clicks. So I figured I could maybe bypass it by vibe coding. So coming up, like finding maybe the top 2 completely different opportunities I might want to address for a target audience, ideating 2 or 3 solution ideas for all of them, and then vibe coding landing pages with the value prop, the hook, and explaining it, and then running user tests where I had people look at 3, 4, 5 landing pages and pick a winner and explain why. So that was my idea, like, hey, I can now do this. It's very cheap. And so I can just put solutions in front of people, or I can build 2 prototypes and have them compare because it is cheap. But I don't think in that case it was right, because it was still, we didn't have the dartboard mapped out, right? I just started throwing darts, but the dartboard wasn't there yet, right? So I think in many cases now, I think the placing of the MVP test or launching is different now because the unit economics have changed drastically. But you still need proper validation, and in some cases, it is not the right test.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what is the impact on the customer and what you try to learn. Like, a thing I always learned from Erica Hall was like the information need you have defines the method by which you get that knowledge. And that didn't change. It's just that we have, especially when we don't talk about putting everything to production right away, which is always a choice we have, like, should we shoot it out to production or not? I have this huge metaphor. If you think about, you go to a tailor and you get something custom tailored, he's always going to ask more like this, more like that. And he's going to show you, just like a designer shows you mood boards. And that is insanely cheap now. like, in the previous podcast, we had Björn talking about a production pipeline where he is basically saying like, basically we have people, the product manager comes up with a PID or whatever you want to call it, and then he comes up with a feature. And now he can have 3 people build 5 versions of the feature in parallel, and we just pick and choose because it's so cheap if we go into this or that direction. And that, by principle, is a way of designing things. And then we have the choice of what do we expose to the client and what do we keep internally and what do we then have just as a choice of direction rather than putting it to production, all that stuff. So I think having that in mind is totally valuable. So just because we have a choice, we don't have to push it all through.
Yeah. And I think that also depends on how your company operates. Right, because I'm running a lot of qualitative tests and quantitative tests. So I heavily distinguish between those two. And I, of course, use vibe coding a lot for running qualitative tests. And there I would recommend any product person to do that. I don't see why not, right? Because you're not pushing anything to your production code base or you're not selling anything. You're just building a prototype that is good enough for a one-on-one user test where you have people on the call, like a moderated or an unmoderated user test where you're like, this is a prototype. There's no risk. But for example, when I think of Wave, I was not vibe coding there, but the founder who built the whole thing, he's a very strong engineer with a strong engineering background, has evolved his AI-assisted coding setup to such an extent that he can deliver new features extremely fast. There we have the question, okay, just because you can, should you? Well, you can run 15 qualitative tests with a prototype and gather feedback and see if you see a pattern. But you can also choose to say, fuck it. Right? Like, we know we need to pivot so often. We know we have something, but we're not happy with it yet, right? We're not there yet. I'm just gonna, if I have an idea and I have enough conviction, I'm not even gonna look for more data. I'm just gonna build it and ship it and see what happens. Because in the end, that adoption data is way more powerful than your qualitative data. So that's also a choice you can make to say, I will externalize all of these ideas that I'm convinced about to the public and kind of see what happens. And that's a totally new way of working for me.
Yeah, I think that is a totally new choice we have, which we didn't have before. Because, of course, before that, as you say, the unit cost was so different. Of course, you have to think about that. And like, if you have a team of 8 engineers working on it for 3 weeks, you better think about it.
Yeah, still we think about it, it's like more bloat, right? Yeah. Because we don't, but you can just remove it. If it doesn't work, you take it away. Yeah. Okay, but then you confuse the audience. Yeah, sure. But also fuck it, right? Like in like this kind of AI native, everything is moving really fast. You never really have comfortable PMF, right? It's always kind of slipping from your hands as you're working. It's a little bit of moving fast and changing things rapidly.
Yeah, and also probably like there's not a ton of AI native startups out there who already have 2,000 customers, so that you would have a huge problem as you say, externalizing everything and confuse a whole lot of people. And a lot of them are having clients which are early movers who totally understand what's going on. So it is a totally different context. And it might look different 10 years for a couple of them, but I think the whole economy of AI-driven software development is going to change anyways, and it's not going to be like just yesterday I had an interview with a company who says like, no, we do everything on custom. We're not even looking for generalizing because it's so cheap. Yeah. Why not give the best to the customer we could, because it's just customized for him. It's not a big deal for us. We can customize for everyone. Yeah. So that also changes totally in the whole dynamics, I think, and how you approach things and what it means to externalize something and all that.
Exactly. So I think when you say, okay, does validate before build still count? Then you have to ask, in this reason, why did we believe that to be true? And does that still hold?
Yeah. Cool. So the next thing you said is the changes between the AI native companies and the other ones is not that much a role change, although we talk a lot about the role changes, but it's much more about structural changes. And there were some interesting structural changes you were talking about. Maybe you can go into that direction a little bit.
Oh, I have to say, it's been a while since I posted that video, but I can tell you a bit about the structural.
Just tell people about what speed we talk about. I think it was 1.5 months ago. So That's the speed of thinking that's going on.
Yeah, of course. A lot has happened.
Yeah.
And so what I can see from where I sit, but this is also I'm of course very much in a bubble, right? I'm
Sure.
looking through
Yeah.
a certain lens. I'm now working with 2 AI native companies to different degrees. So one of them is Wave that I've already mentioned, which is a very AI native product, and it's just very few people. So obviously there's none of the artifacts like the Scrum artifacts, and there was no middle management layer to begin with, right? So it's always been like more everybody independently working, syncs when we need them, and like that. The other company I'm working with is SwitchUp, who are building an internal tool which is to be AI native. So the idea is to build a tool where human customer support can work together with their AI agent counterpart. Not with the goal of replacing the people who are here, absolutely not, but the goal of augmenting them and taking unnecessary tasks away from them. And what I generally also see in the market is some time ago, it was a flex to talk about how you scaled headcount, right? It was like, we grew 100%. This year, we're going to hire this many people. And I feel like now there's a counter flex that it's like, we're very small. The smaller you are, the cooler it is, right? If you look at all of the, or many of the more famous or the cooler companies, if you look at like Linear or Midjourney or Perplexity or any of these companies, they're all relatively small and proud of it. So I definitely think we see a counter movement there. And that makes a lot of sense if you consider more generalist people, more convergent people, right? If you consider product people sitting there who can come up with ideas, come up with a test strategy, run those tests end to end, feed those learnings back in without handing over to anyone else, without handing over to a designer or an engineer. Of course, you don't need anybody coordinating between all of these people. You can learn much faster, and you just have a lot less coordination necessary. So you can have a smaller organization and still 10x the amount of learning.
Yeah, what I like about this, I always like to think from the extremes, because I think the extremes teach us a lot and give us a little bit of a glimpse of the future. And I think what you're describing will, over time, just because of sheer unit economics, change the view on software development. And like, you can ignore economy, but economy won't ignore you. So I think, as in all these trends or movements, the big ones will follow up later on. And I think what is inevitable is a software team will not be 6, 7, 8 people anymore. Like, why? Like, with that level of automation, you just don't need them. You don't need the hardcore specifics of front end versus back end versus what have you, because like most of the specializations are known by the LLMs and by the tools. So, and the role of the software developer will, I think, go more into the direction of honing the production pipeline rather than doing the coding himself. Of course, he will observe the coding. There's always going to be the human in the loop and all that stuff, and quality assurance of how the production pipeline is. I said in one of those meetings that if you look at the role of designer, he will come up with a design system, but he will optimize the design system so that the machine comes up with better output. That's the role. How will I change the machine so the design that is the output will become better? It's the same for the software engineer. So it needs 2 people to work on a product. It doesn't need 10 people. And that's, I think, the shift. And that means the role of the product manager, if he, like, the thinking will always be there, but if he remains to exist, will also not be like, I as a product manager will serve one team.
Yeah. Or
which are 2 people. Yeah, it's
acceptance criteria.
Yeah. Like, that makes no sense anymore.
Yeah. What I find really wonderful about all of this level of automation, right? Like, I don't know many product managers who enjoyed writing Jira tickets and acceptance criteria, right? So great. And the one thing we never had time for, sadly, was connecting to humans. that was really always on the back burner. I spent so much time working with startups and scale-ups, trying to get them working with the product trio, which I got from Teresa Torres' book, Continuous Discovery Habits, which is a must read. So I tried to get the product trio or quartets or quintets, right? I tried to get people involved in discovery. And a lot of people were interested, but in the end, it always got left by the wayside by both the product people and the engineers and designers. Even the product people, they were like, yeah, I was so busy with the sprint work, did not manage to schedule any interviews this week. Every time, again. And I'm like, make more time, right? Like, push harder, try harder. I got so caught up with what we were doing in the sprint. And the engineer, out of 10 customer interviews, the engineer was there maybe 2 or 3. The rest of the time, they were busy coding. And the designer, also, when it came to validation, the designer wasn't able to make the click dummy because he or she was delivering designs for what goes into the sprint and changing that. And it was just incredibly stupid. So I'm very excited about the time this automation would free up so we can finally do the one thing that I don't think AI can never do, because it's not a human, remember, is to be a human and connect with other humans on a real level of empathy. So I'm very excited about the idea that all of these roles now might have more time for that and be able to finally focus where they should be focusing.
Yeah, and also the relief it gives to me, like the talk I'm giving since 10 years is gestalten statt verwalten. So it's creating instead of administration. And like all the administration is gone now. We don't need to take a lot of care about it. Like, we automate a little and then it just exists, and we can even tell the tools to build the automation for us, and like it's elegantly self-contained somehow. So we get all the time of doing all the creation stuff and thinking about design and thinking about the user and customer and getting in touch with them and having the deep conversation with development on like how should it feel like and all that stuff, which we couldn't do before. So I think that is really liberating, and that is what the time should be used for, really. Maybe we can double down that by, maybe you can give us a little bit of a hint on how a day in your life as a product manager in such an environment looks like, and like maybe not even the idealized one, but the last one you had, or I don't know, the last day where you even had critical communications with your people or anything. I don't know, like maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight of how this life looks like, because we hear all the myths, but it's really hard to track down online beyond I don't know, maybe the bad examples we hear on Dennis' podcast on how it works at LinkedIn, which might be true or not, and it's a lot of entertainment, I think. But how do you work like?
I can tell you 2 different examples.
Yeah, cool.
So basically, I spend now a lot of my time in my IDE. I use Windsurf with Claude Code as a plugin. And I'm surprised at how many different tasks are actually part of a system and therefore better suited to go in a local repository working on it with Claude Code. As to my work, for example, I have multiple clients, 2 main clients right now, which I've already mentioned. For each of them, I have a folder or a repository, like a second brain for that specific client, which has a lot of data stored in it. I am using, for one client, SwitchUp, which is very AI forward. We just have that on a private repo and we just push back and forth. So that's how we collaborate on the business side of things. For another client, I can have an MCP and I can push it to some collaboration tool. So I'm working there. I have... let's say just the product management. I'm thinking of, okay, I do interviews. I do about 3-4 interviews per week, like interviews with a target audience or with customers. I'm looking into post-hoc data. Well, that's mostly it. I think in other clients, I might also have Zendesk data, etc. But in this setup, I'm thinking about Wave right now. I have this. So I have interviews. I take manual notes during the interview, and I also have a transcript. So for each interview, I put both into one document always in the same structure. So I have my notes on top and then the full transcript, and I have that for each interviewee. Each interview is stored in a folder for the ICP, because I'm always very rigid about splitting ICPs from each other. Then I will be talking to Claude Code because one of the big issues that I was always trying to solve, and I still do that with an opportunity solution tree, but the OST always gets a bit unruly at some point, right? And you have to clean it up. And the big issue is this like last interview bias. You had like these last two conversations and you anchor on those. And it's really hard to mentally keep track on all the other conversations you've had. And of course, working with Claude Code in a local repository is just amazing because I keep storing everything there and it just has access to everything. And it's also able to segment in a new way. When I'm trying to slice it in a new way, it can just go back through all of that data and do it again. And so I use that to uncover any insights or opportunities that I've missed. Or I go the other way around. I'll be talking to the founder and they say, I think we should do this, or I want to focus on a new audience, and then I can look for, do we have any evidence there, right? So I have all of that there.
And let me stop right there, because like you see me smiling already, because like one of my pet peeves is that every company I work with, I try to get them, first of all, doing interviews. And then it's like, oh, it's just interviews and only interviews. It's the only tool they have. But my main complaint always is most people don't have the skills because of time. Most of the time, it's really availability of time to look beyond the interview and beyond what the customer said, and come from what the client wants to what the need is behind the want.
Yeah.
So, and that actually takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of pattern recognition by people telling the same stories over again. This is what he said, and then what he meant is this, and then when his eyes came shining, it was about this. And what you're describing right now, I think, is how you can make sense of all the data, all the qualitative data, by your slicing and dicing and looking at it from different directions. And your partner in being able to do it is technology, which helps you to have all those different lenses on those interviews and those qualitative statements, which I think is so valuable. And ironically, so much more than people just having an interview, writing it down and saying, this is what the client wants. Like it's so insane, because it's so counterintuitive that this can be so much richer than a person digesting it, not talking about it, and just going straight on.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing is this reactive product management, right? Like somebody mentioned it. Oh, we should build it. I think I've been working with OSTs for a long time and training teams on how to do that to fight that. Right? Like instead say, okay, is this something that actually comes up a lot? Is there a pattern? Yeah. Does it actually fit our outcome? Right? If we address this, will this actually move our outcome? Is it the most likely thing to address our outcome? So that kind of thinking I've been doing training teams on for a long time. But I think I like that because sometimes I framed it in a certain way and I thought, okay, this is important profiling information. It matters if they are developers or DevOps, and it matters how experienced they are. But later I'm like, actually not. Actually, maybe something else is different. And that was really hard to do before, because then I had to go back through all of my like hundreds of interviews and say, shit, I need to change this parameter. Really hard. But now that's so easy.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm still doing OSTs, but then I'm like, shit, maybe I should reframe it completely. Like maybe I need to turn it around. And the same thing when it comes to problem understanding. When I hear something come up a few times, it will show up in slightly different formats because people talk about it in different ways, also depending on where they come from and who they are. But it will show up in different ways. So if I hear it once, I will not really understand it. But if I hear it 10 times in different ways, I love using AI and saying, hey, I think this is an opportunity. Can you now go again through my interview transcripts and see where else that's showing up and give me the direct quotes? And then I have this pre-read and I can look through it and I go like, no, that one is not it. That's different. But that I think is the same. Let me get back into the context of that interview. And that's, of course, amazing if you do it in your IDE with Claude Code, like, because it's all there and you can like zoom in and zoom out very quickly to build that problem understanding, which you should spend more time on than ideating solutions. And
because like for many people, what you talk about, and you say you're in a bubble. Potentially, I'm in a bubble as well. But the thing that I want people to understand is everything we talk about is most parts ridiculously easy. because the tools themselves support you so much in getting it done. It's not like you have to be a coder and you don't have to encode rules like crazy. You honestly talk to those systems and tell them, now we got it down, can you automate it? And it writes the script for you, basically.
You do need to understand what you want.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the thing I think we have a leg up is as decent product people, is that we should be relatively good at explaining what it is we want and why we want it. And you do need to judge what good looks like.
Yeah.
For example, I did a post today on LinkedIn and it got a lot of likes about what my repository looks like for my writing and the slash commands I use there and how I work there. And I have this screenshot where it shows these 3 layers. And people are really like, wow, this is so great. But how did I do that? I just explained to Claude Code, like, this is my process. And this is now my writing folder. And it's a mess. Whoa, I've just been kind of writing in it. It's terrible. But this is kind of what I'm doing. Like this, and this is what I wanted to do. And then it said, let's do it like this. And then I could say, actually, I don't think that belongs there. I think this is hierarchically above that, right? Because I understand what it is I'm doing. So I understand the hierarchies. And it goes, oh, you're right. So we go back and forth a bit and then it just did it.
And I think that's also a funny experience with those tools, that the interaction is so much more macro than what we were used to as when we would actually work in IDE for code. Like every semicolon counts and everything gets a compiler error and everything. But here's like, you actually give it really basic, really raw instructions and it just does the thing because it knows so much. It has so much understanding and that's, I think, where potentially the vibe thing comes from. You give a lot of control to these tools and then you look at it and you're the human loop saying, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Do it this way. And for me personally, sometimes feel like, I'm not the person directing people a lot. It feels like overburdening the tool and, I'm asking now to do the 10th and 20th iteration and how maddening it must be. Oh no, it's a machine. Yeah, it's fine. Like, give it another 10 rounds until it's done. It's cool. It doesn't matter, except maybe for your Claude rate.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. No, but I'm having the time of my life, right? And I'm noticing now more and more. I started with vibe coding. I started with Replit in just really building web applications that I could share. But now I'm still doing that for landing pages. I vibe coded for the client that I'm at an ATS, an applicant tracking system that they can use to hand over applicants in the recruiting pipeline. But I'm recognizing more and more that anytime I do a task where I am iterating on files or documents, where these things kind of are part of a larger system, I should do it in a repository with Claude Code and I should do it in my IDE. And there are just so many use cases now, right? So even for this recruiting org building, I also put it into a local repo because I figured out that for each role that we hire, the cornerstone is the criteria that we think are important for that role. And everything else cascades from there, like the job description, the live case study, how we assess them, right? How we find them. It all cascades from the criteria. So there's a system. So anytime there's a system, I bring it into some file structure, some local repository, and I work on it with Claude Code. And it's just much better than anything I've done before. All the inconsistencies and the drift is gone.
Yeah. So yesterday evening, I got an interesting question. I did a little stupid video on how I go from interviews to PRD to whatever, like that classical PM process. And then a person rightfully asked me, like, yeah, but what's the difference? I'm doing all these things in ChatGPT anyways. So, but of course, like, there is a fundamental difference. So maybe you can, for the faint-hearted and people who are interested in this but didn't make the move towards these tools out of the best reasons, you can describe from your point of view, what is the ease and the reasoning why you lean into these tools?
So for me, it's very much about context, right? So I want to give it the exact right context to be able to do the task at hand, the task at hand, and also be able to update everything around it now that I've changed this right, because it's like Tetris or a puzzle, and if I touch this piece, it actually impacts all of these pieces, and in order to create this piece, it needs to know of some of these pieces. And if I am on a web interface, you can create a project or a custom gem or a thing, right, which I did before. And for me, this is my experience, they grew stale very quickly. So I had a custom gem. I was a Gemini girl. I had a custom gem for every client that I worked with, and it was like the GTM coach for Wave and the coach for Wave. And it had these, like, you upload a few documents and you have this description of what it should do. But 2 weeks later, that kind of was stale already, right? And it just became unusable, and I stopped using it. And that is solved for me with this different way of working, where everything is just in local files and they're structured. The only issue there is that your files become a mess because it's growing. But there, of course, Claude, like I use Claude Code, can help you, right? Because you can say, can you have a look at what I'm doing? What is now inconsistent between the pieces? This is a question that I'm asking a lot. Where are the inconsistencies? What is not necessary anymore? Where are the duplicates? So it can help you keep that clean. So for me, it's about having that frame of context all the time that is just naturally growing as my learnings evolve and as, So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I also think and now it sounds a little bit like, you and me, we're consultants, so we have a lot of contacts and we need to keep them in shape. But also if you're working internally, like
Totally.
how I use it inside of a company is, guess what? Your tactics change over time, all of the time. Every other week it looks different. I can now put it consistently into the thing rather than, as you said, in a project or a gem or whatever. It gets stale over time because I forget to update it. And now it's so much work to update it over here that I rather open a new one over here. And then you have all the mess you might have on your Claude files. I now have projects all over the place which are not connected anymore. And pieces of the knowledge are over here, pieces of the knowledge are over there, and I can't make sense of it anymore. And the other thing is, it keeps more consistent because you have it in your local files. And the files are the things you can share across the boundaries to the next discipline. So you can hand the PRD, the user stories, the whatever, directly over to the developer who can start with that one and put it into his context also. Yeah. So basically you have a universal interface in those markdown files.
Yeah.
To share information and context as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we are doing here at SwitchUp is just pushing it to a private repo, right? So we just have access to each other's repositories.
Yeah.
And then you're just, hey, check out this file in the repo, and you can just open it from there.
Yeah, and like my most extreme statement probably these days is like, because they talk a lot about how potentially in those smaller teams, middle management is not that thick of a layer. A strategy discussion now, if it doesn't end up in Claude MD, is the wrong discussion you're having. So, because that's how, if your ICP changes, it should somehow end up in Claude MD. If it doesn't in Claude MD, the developers are doing the wrong thing. You're doing the wrong thing as a product manager. The whole system needs to know about that change. Exactly. And that's how closely tied all these things are. And that's insane, actually. But it's also nice because everything is so close. So if you have a discussion like that in your company, that the ICP changes or a detail changes, did you update your Claude MDs? Yeah. Or did you change where it pulls that strategic or technical information?
Yeah, exactly. I would do the latter.
Yeah.
Because otherwise,
you don't want to overload the Claude MD.
Yeah, and also it's going to be, everybody does it slightly differently, right? But I find, so I'm actually working with one coachee because this is a big question that I get, like, how can I start using this? Right? What is a practical use case for me? And I'm like, okay, let's talk through your work and let's see what we find. And we can relatively quickly find one. And one of my coachees was talking about communication.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me as a product manager, communication is one of the hardest things. Communication to stakeholders, even, right? It took me so long to understand that every stakeholder, every person needs a slightly different message because they care about different things. I think there's so many PMs that make the mistake of talking to the CPO or the CEO about, we should change this feature because the way the feature works today is really bad, it's really ugly, right? And so that's not the right way to communicate. There's a lot of stuff about this, like what do they care about, right? Well, they will care about, how does this fit in the larger picture? How does this contribute to our goal? How will this move your product metric that you are responsible for, and why do you think that, right? Like, what's your evidence? Or so that's the way to communicate. But if you're talking to your engineers, obviously it's a very different message, because they care more about, okay, so now you want me to work on that. When does it down prioritize the other thing that I'm working on? Who am I working with? Right. So it's a different message. And I think I personally struggled with this a lot. And this PM who was talking to me was saying, okay, this is very hard for me, is to take one piece of information and tailor the way I transfer that information to these different layers of abstraction. And so we started working on putting that into a repository. So she also has one file of basic information, of canonical stuff. So it's about ICP. What is the product? What is the market? What is the product category? What is the messaging? What is the value prop? All of this like basic stuff. What are our goals for 2026? What any P&L information that she has goes in there, because it helps when talking to the CEO. It helps to do this math. And then a quick description on all of the stakeholders and like, what do they care about, right? And this is very helpful, because then if something changes about a project, we can tailor that and we can automatically spin up some type of information. We can also check, are we now in sync everywhere? Because that's the biggest problem, this kind of drift, right? You told this person the new timeline, but you didn't tell that person the new timeline. So I think it's a very nice application of how it's not just faster and easier, but just better, right? Because it just hopefully eradicates these inconsistencies a bit more and helps you communicate on the right level.
Yeah, and like I do stuff like that similarly. It is only possible because I lay down the context so much. And it sounds complicated, but it's not. Like, basically write down, what is this company about? Who are the clients? And you give it like a really normal description, but you don't need to be scientific about it. It just needs to know that. What I can do then is, like, I work with a lot of clients with the format of briefing, back briefing. So the CEO gives a briefing to his C-level, and the C-level responds with a back briefing to see if, because now it's two-way communication, did they understand it the right way? By answering what they would do now, he understands if they did understand. And of course, like, if you have, like, 6 reports on that level, it's a lot of work to read all these back briefings, although they're worth the time, but it's still a time-consuming, mind-consuming task to have all the diffs, seeing where the intent drifts, to have all of that in mind, to react to it and stuff. If instead you can upload all that stuff and have kind of a diff or an intent drift being detected by the AI, that makes it so much easier to keep track of it. And of course, he's still reading that stuff and he's still having the one-on-ones with the people and all that, but it's so much easier to keep track of all that, because what's happening in most of the companies on this abstract level is everything is an intangible. Yeah. Everything just drifts away. And 3 months later, everybody's like, when did it happen? We're talking each week, but this just slipped away. They're like, yeah, because you can't backtrack it, because you don't have a formalized system, and because it's all vague, abstract stuff, but you now have a tool to make all this stuff much more tangible and not just drift away. And that's so cool, I think. And I think the inventors of all that stuff didn't think about these levels. It's just happening. We're just discovering it.
I think it's two things, right? One thing, you can keep track. And second thing, you can talk to an AI to make things explicit that were just implicitly in your brain.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of things we kind of feel, but we can't tease out what it is. And you can spar within your system about, like, what does that mean, right? And which makes it also easier to keep track of.
Yeah, and I think it can bring the proofs to the table. It's like, this is where he said it. And again, it's only useful if we assume best intent of all people. Like, it's not to pin down people on doing something stupid or whatever. It's like, no, we need to lead this company. We need to be in sync. I can now detect where we are not in sync, although we think so. That's so funny about that stuff.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting what you're saying about, because you, all the way in the beginning of the conversation, you were talking about when you were doing product and you were looking into the marketing side of things, and somebody got kind of upset because they had hinged their entire career on having done that, and they kind of can't have you in there as well, potentially criticizing them or kind of stepping on their toes. And I think when we talk about convergence of roles and also changing organizations, I've seen many organizations where this toe stepping and this territory hogging was a real thing, right? It was very much like, why do you need access to my sales pipeline? Do you not trust me that I'm telling you the truth? Why? Why do you want to talk to the customer? No, I'm telling you, just believe me, right? And it's not, you need a different culture, a different organization, but also different types of people who don't naturally do that, right? And also different organization where you're not going to get punished, right? The idea is not that I'm going to go in and say like, you are bad at your job. That's not it. Or you failed. That's not it. It's just like, all of this matters to all of us, right? We're all in the same team running towards the same mission, and all of it matters to all of us. So let's have more sets of eyes on it. And if it isn't working, that isn't on you, right? Also embrace failures. We're trying things. Some things work, some things don't. But we need to be transparent about that. We need to see that so that we can improve. So I think that's a big shift that needs to happen in a lot of organizations in order for this role convergence to work. And I think a lot of organizations won't be able to do that.
And I think what's interesting is that the technology might help with the math, because the technology helps us that the company accept the huge ones. I think in general, companies don't need to be that big anymore, which means the meaning, the semantics of a department, of a silo isn't that big anymore, which means it isn't invite for that hogging anymore that much, which means it invites more of that other mindset, which is, oh, we're all in this together. We're in the same boat. It needs to go in one direction. And here we are finding out about issues we need to solve. And now we just get it done. And as you said in one of your pieces, it doesn't matter that much who's finding any of those issues we need to tackle.
Yeah, exactly. So I love organizations that are going there. I think there are some organizations that will struggle to go there, right? Because the people who are sitting there grew up more in this information hogging kind of dynamic, and it's very scary or impossible for them to step out of it. But those organizations will be in trouble.
Yeah, and I think, we can't blame people, because there's this world where all of this behavior is basically required for career building. And now there's this world where none of that helps.
Yes.
And that's just what it is. And I think for a couple of years, you might have to pick and choose in which kind of world you work. But I think the old world will dissolve, maybe except some dinosaurs, which are too big to fail, probably. But all the middle companies will have to shift a lot just because of the economics behind this. If you don't move now, in 5 years, it's going to be too late, I think. And I don't want people to panic over it. It's just like, I think it's fair, if you have the insights on how the new world of work looks like, to tell people what it is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people I've met, again, I'm in a bubble, are really excited about this, right? There's a lot of product people who are very excited to step into this world, and engineers who are super excited to now finally have more time to learn about products and get closer to the customer. So I'm seeing not that much fear. I see generally a lot of excitement. So I'm hoping this new world is coming back quite quickly.
I'm like nearly coming to the end of the conversation. I have one funny question, which I'm thinking about a lot. So if we think about this world where, I don't know, you have a team of 1 or 2 software developers, you have maybe a PM serving 5 of those teams, or you don't, or you actually have a total dissolve of these roles at all. If you think back about, 20 years, might even already be 30 years, when Agile took over the world, there was this one complaint, which was, now that we're thinking in 2-week sprints, it's hard to have an overview of the whole thing we're building. So everything is dissolving into those tiny units of works. What is the big picture? It's really hard to get hold of the big picture. I think 2-week sprints will be absurd for lots of these smaller companies. They just don't exist. The rituals don't exist. So the question will be, what are the rituals? Will there be any rituals? If not, how do we keep 50 insane, wild people in line who are also really smart, generalist people? How do we keep them in line? And the best comparison I have, like I was for a couple of years in huge consultancy, 60,000 people, all hormone driven, everyone really super smart, which can also be a problem because how do you direct them into one direction? So the question is, if you have all these smart people weaponized with all that technology, how do we keep them in line? Like, out of your everyday life, do you already see answers to how do we keep the big picture line, consistency and all that?
I think this is a super interesting question. When it comes to what you said earlier, firstly about Agile, like now everything is in 2-week sprints. We don't see the big picture anymore. Most organizations where I was, that was not the case. It was actually still very like 1-year goal project, and like we turned that into a 2-week sprint, right? So
that's the other side that also existed, yes.
That's the one that I've seen.
Yeah.
And secondly, with Agile, like the artifacts going away, even before this movement, I encountered a lot of people who are really sick and tired of the Agile artifacts. People like really bored with these boring stand-ups where nobody's really saying anything, and like retrospective, just people complaining about the same thing forever. So I'm not sure. Maybe that depends on the organization. They were doing it wrong. I don't know. But I've encountered a lot of people who were not loving it anymore already, and a lot of companies stepping away from it, still having the 2-week sprints, but not doing these artifacts as much anymore. As to how do we do this in the future, I have no idea. I think it depends on the organization, like the size, the culture, the type of people who are there. How we do it at SwitchUp is there's a lot of space for cross-pollination. So there's like tech team meetings, also a lot of things where you can voluntarily join, where everybody joins, more hackathons, the kind of things that people really like to do. Like, here's a problem, how can we solve it? It's not really on the docket, but it's a big one. How can we solve it? So I think it depends. There's not like the clear frame as in, okay, here's Scrum, here are these sprints, and here are these artifacts. It's more like, okay, what's working for us? So I notice also on maybe you'll be smaller, right? So maybe you don't need as much as a rigid frame, because we're not dealing with how do we operate together with 100 tech people, but how do we do this as 15 tech people or 20 tech people? So that changes the dynamic quite a lot. And maybe it will be made more personal, because you'll also maybe have space for a human OS, right? As in, I know that this person doesn't really respond on Slack messages at all. And they like to focus because they have focus blocks in their calendar. But if I need to have regular updates with this person, I'll just have a weekly jour fix. And this other person is really responsive to Slack and likes to work at night. Before that, we couldn't handle the cognitive load of everybody's preferences, but maybe now we can, right? Because we could store it somewhere else. So maybe we don't need such a rigid structure, because the rigid structure is about the idea of like everybody must function the same way because we don't have the headspace for anything else. Now we do. So
yeah, probably it goes hand in hand with the flex and the anti-flex that you mentioned, like where before the flex was going huge and scaling like crazy, even tactics which maybe don't even work when you scale them. Because like the origin of all that stuff was small, dedicated teams. It wasn't huge organizations. Then the huge organizations wanted to keep up, and that's why we have, scaled agile frameworks and all that stuff, which, work or work not in these environments, who cares? And now the solution comes from a totally different direction, which is like, yeah, maybe big companies are not that efficient. Maybe it's small companies. And then the whole problem goes away, because like it's not that hard to go in one direction with 10, 20 people.
Exactly. So I'm, again, very biased and opinionated here. I'm not the right person to talk to because I've always chosen startups and scale-ups to work with, actually more startups, like always below 100 FTE. Right. Currently, the company I'm working with is 45 FTE. That's like my sweet spot. So I did that on purpose. Obviously, I was never happy in corporate, so I'm probably not the right person to talk about that.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like how many 40, 50, 70, 80, 90, 100 person companies do I know which have a huge problem already because the teams are so big?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Most of them have a 50% technology squad or whatever you want to call it, department, which is 4 or 5 teams, which all go astray in all kinds of different directions. Like, it shouldn't be that hard, but what makes it hard, I think, is the level of hierarchy that already exists, although you're just a 100-person company. And those teams trying to be totally independent and what have you, and then it's hard to find the glue again. So I think, I don't know, being 10 times as small brings 100% less problems, probably. I don't know. The numbers are just so teasing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way.
So in your life, in your professional life, what are the next plans? What are you going to do with everything you experience right now?
I don't have a big strategy. I'm going to keep going as I'm going. I'm having just a lot of fun. So I love keeping track of what's happening. And I have this luxury, I think, that you might have as well as a consultant, to apply it in your everyday life, right? Anything that I find interesting, I can find a use case and I can start to do it. I can create my own work life, right? I can do with my time almost what I want to do with it. So I'm going to keep enjoying that luxury. That's basically the plan. Yeah. So I'm working with 2 clients now, pretty much booked out. I have some potential slots for coachees. I'm also very interested in maybe thinking on how to coach people more on this stuff, because my existing coachees have asked me about it. But mainly that.
Yeah, so we also had the conversation before we made the recording where you said, like, leaning into this can be such a lot of fun and leaving a lot of the intellectual ballast behind. Because, the limitations of the technology are well known. Like, we don't need to discuss them from morning to evening. If AGI will ever exist or not, who cares? Like, and it's just like 80% of the content out there is like, it doesn't yet work, and it's not yet Yoon. Who cares? Like, it can do so much, and what it already can will not go away, even if the bubble in the States explodes. Who cares? Like, the technology will still be here and the opportunities we have. So have fun in leaning into it. That being said, how do you learn that stuff? What are sources you go back to when you want to see where all of this is going?
So for coming up with ideas, what I could do with it, like use cases, I'm looking at my network quite a lot. I could recommend following Teresa Torres. She posts a lot on how she actively uses it. Like
the cynical thing to say is we should all be happy that she was injured last May, because that's when she started her journey into all the how can I use AI? And since then she's exploding on, I don't know, nearly daily postings on where she goes deep on how she does things and how it combines with her product thinking and everyday life, even, what have you. Yeah, so that's a great source.
I think that's a great source. There's many, like, she comes to mind, but there's other people like me trying to post about what they are doing when it comes to how do I do it. Claude, right? Or the LLM of your choosing. I have people writing me on LinkedIn, and I find it very sweet, but they're like, oh, I saw your post. Can we jump on a call and you help me set it up? I'm like, well, no. That's like, no, like, just ask Claude. It's like 2 seconds, right? It's really not hard. If it was hard, I would really, but it's not hard. And I think the best advice is just do something. Build something, set something up, and also take that as learning, right? Don't go like, I'm going to build this because it's going to be the most efficient system I have ever had, but be like, I'm going to build this because in building this, I'm going to learn something, and that is extremely valuable. And maybe the thing that I'm building is useful and maybe not. That's fine. It's like, it's a class for myself.
Yeah, and I think that is actually the best advice. Lean into it, just do it, don't overthink it. We overthought AI for a couple of years. It's about time we just do it. Like, we know about the dangers. We're all thinking people, it's fine. And it's also okay to just do it and apply it in your safe space that you're having. You will not ruin the world by doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess people can follow you on LinkedIn. They can read, be inspired.
Yeah, so I've LinkedIn and also Substack.
Cool.
So you can find me on Else van der Berg, as spelled there, at .substack.com.
Yeah, and I will post all the links in the show notes so that people can find you.
Great.
When hearing this. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Like, I was totally convinced that by the stuff you're writing, this is going to be a great conversation, and it was even better than I imagined. So thanks a lot for because I always transport that fun that's in it, and not just the duty and all of that. And I think we need more of that. So thanks a lot for bringing that to the conversation.
Thanks you so much for having me.
Yeah, and go on having fun with all that stuff and write more of that content. Much appreciated.
I definitely will.
Thanks a ton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.